What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac, live from Amazin Day. That's right. Great crowd here in the auditorium at Citi Field. And you're the smart people here because we're giving away 2 tickets to the Cadillac Club at the end of this show. Those tickets will be for Thursday, April 17th against the Cardinals. That is a night game at 7:10 p.m. 2 Cadillac Club tickets plus a parking pass. That goes a long way. So if you stick around, we'll have a sign-up sheet at the end of the show. We will be raffling them off. We will take emails, and we'll see who ends up sitting in the Cadillac Club. Joe and I have done that before. Awesome experience. Great time at Citi Field. And, man, we are happy to be here at Amazin Day.
Happy to be here. Amazin Day. Just such a good job by the Mets putting this together. And you just walk around and you just bump into Starling Marte, or you bump into – there's all different players. Everything's here. Really great job by the Mets putting this together, and I'm really thankful that we get to do this.
Yeah, this is awesome. Great turnout. Thank you to everybody that showed up here at the auditorium. We're going to get right into it. And by the way, we are going to take questions from the audience. So raise a hand right now if you have a question. By the way, you want to speak on the microphone. Do not be shy. 2's a good start. When we've done this at the QBC before, sometimes people look at us and like, I am not getting up on a microphone. Spring training was a little different. You have about 20 people that they're ready to roll for this season.
They're fearless in spring training.
Yeah, so we will have the microphone passed around. You could ask whatever you want. Joe and I are going to kick things off with a simple question for you, Joe, and the only thing you can't say is sign Pete Alonso. What's left to do this offseason?
Figure out the Pete Alonso situation. And, of course, we know that they're going through contract negotiations, and I still personally will believe that Pete Alonso is not a Met when I see a tweet or a post that Pete Alonso has signed somewhere else. But outside of the Pete Alonso situation, at this point, if he does depart and go somewhere else, first base, third base.
He's still alive, by the way. Yeah. Depart is a tough word.
Depart's the Mets.
Yes.
Depart's the Mets.
Yes.
If he does leave and play somewhere else, the Mets' first base, third base situation is probably going to have to be internal. At this point, everybody has come off the market. What else is left to do? They could use more help in the bullpen. I would say another reliever or 2 would help. And if Pete Alonso, again, I hate to keep circling back to him, but that is a big financial aspect of, investing $20-something million. Maybe they could add another pitcher to the starting rotation before spring training gets going. So there is still some work to do, but largely the team that you see right now is pretty much what the Mets team is going to look like.
So as many as combos as we have around Pete, I think the follow-up that we never have is, say Pete Alonso's not on this team. I'm with you until he's not back with the Mets. It feels like the best resolution for both sides is that he's here. What does the top of this lineup look like? Because the big combo around Pete is you need power behind Soto. You need power behind Soto. And we know Vientos is going to bring a lot of that power. But how do you structure this lineup, especially with Jesse Winker back in the fold, which was a nice resolution we got over the last 2 weeks?
I think you can't take Francisco Lindor out of the leadoff spot. I think he's established himself as that is the spot for him. Juan Soto is your prototypical 2-hitter. He's going to get on base 43% of the time, and obviously a power hitter. He brings everything to the table, and that's something that as we go through this offseason, we talk about everything that the Mets have done, and then we quickly move on to what's next, right? Like you just said. Yeah. Let's not forget that the Mets signed Juan Soto. Let's not forget the big impact there. Right after him, I think it's Mark Vientos, and that's some additional pressure and something we haven't really, something we haven't talked about much because Vientos was obviously such a star for the 2024 team, and I fully believe in him. But now there's a potential of learning first base and having the bat behind Juan Soto, so it's important that he repeats that. And the cleanup spot, Brandon Nimmo, I think. Is that probably the answer?
It's a good question. I mean, not your typical 4-hitter.
No.
Somebody that his game has changed over the years. Yeah. We've seen more power and less on base, and you wonder if that's, by design or if that's something that can alter, depends where he hits. But I think it's that wide open in the air. I think if you asked Met fans a year ago, a lot would hope that Francisco Alvarez is ready to hit 4 or 5. But I think after the down year last year, that's something he would have to earn the first couple months of the season, not something that I think Mendoza would just slot him into.
No, Alvarez needs to establish himself. And let's not forget how young he is as well. Alvarez, catchers typically develop slower than every other position. So the fact that he was up at the age that he was impressive in itself. I think he's in for a big 2025, and he said as such to the media today. He's feeling good about his chances this year, and whether it's becoming a cleanup hitter or whatever, I think Francisco Alvarez is still on that trajectory to be one of the better offensive catchers in the sport.
Joe, you brought up the rotation. We don't know if the Mets are done spending on the rotation. We know when they speak, for leverage reasons, they seem pretty happy with what they have penciled in. Of course, an opportunity could come up with some guys left on this market. I want to get the crowd involved here, but before I do, who do you think should start opening day for the Mets this year? Because Sean Manaea is coming off the year with all the momentum, but I think sometimes, because he missed basically the entire year, we forget how good Kodai Senga could be as the front man.
I think it's Sean Manaea. I think he established himself as the ace of this Mets staff heading into spring training. And, of course, Kodai Senga, if he could stay healthy, there's no reason why he can't perform like he did in 2023. But where I stand today, I would plan the rotation out to have Sean Manaea pitching opening day.
All right, show of hands. You want Sean Manaea on the mound for opening day? Majority of the crowd. Kodai Senga, show of hands. 1, 2? Wow, how quickly people move. Is there an other? We have any Griffin Canning fans out there in the house right now? Frankie Montas. All right, I think it's
David Peterson.
David Peterson, who continues to be overlooked, I think, in this rotation. So Sean Manaea by the crowd vote.
Yeah, and I think that's the right play for where the Mets are currently. And, I know some people are upset in a way with how the Mets built the rotation because you see other teams just get, the Dodgers. Let's just say it. The Dodgers. They just keep getting different aces on top of aces. But the Mets and this pitching development system has proven that they have the ability to take guys with talent and mold them into being better pitchers. Look, this time last year, was anyone excited that the Mets signed Sean Manaea? Like, we list on the show, if you listen to the Mets pod, we told you why we think it could work out, but nobody really knew that it would, and it worked out as good as humanly possible. And, of course, Luis Severino, who ended up signing with the Oakland, Las Vegas, Sacramento A's this offseason, he was another one that the Mets were able to turn around. So that's what they need to do with the likes of Frankie Montas. And I'm going to say it here. I think Clay Holmes is going to be an unbelievable starting pitcher.
And a lot of people are skeptical right now on that thought. So explain why you think the transition makes sense for him going from 9th inning, 8th inning guy to maybe some of his deficiencies are masked a little bit to start out the game, even if that's a 5-inning guy.
I think when you take a look at Clay Holmes, obviously he came up as a starting pitcher. He was a starting pitcher in the major leagues for the Pirates. Wasn't overly successful, but he was. I think when you look at just his raw stuff, he's got the power sinker, one of the better sinkers in all of the sport. He has 2 distinct sliders. He has that sweeper, which just sweeps across the zone. He has the gyro slider, which cuts down, and that's a little more effective against left-handed hitters. What he's going to have to do is emphasize the use of his four-seam fastball a little more, which he did towards the end of the season, and maybe do some work on like a changeup or a split or something to change the eye level for a left-handed hitter. If he's able to do that, I think there's no reason why Clay Holmes can't be every bit as good as some of these relievers that have transitioned to starting pitchers over the last couple of years.
All right, so for the second year in a row, the Mets pod will be back down at Port St. Lucie for the opener. That is Saturday, February 22nd. We will be hanging outside the main gate before the game, so please come by and say hello. We had so much fun with the crowd last year. I think with Juan Soto in the house, the crowd is going to be insane this year, and it was last year as well. What are you most excited, Joe, to see in this spring training? Because last year you and I when we were on our way down, we're like, we want to see Diaz throw. We just want to see Diaz back on the mound. That was the number one clear-cut thing. Went to the backfields, watched a lot of the young guys take BP because the Mets have a lot of young talent in this system. What's different about this year?
I want to see some of the young hitters that are prime for opportunities this year. We mentioned Brett Beatty as a possibility at third base.
An open competition.
It could be an open competition for third base. So you have Brett Beatty. Carlos Mendoza said a little while ago here that Luis Angel Acuna is going to have a big role on the 2025 Mets. Drew Gilbert is a bit of a quote-unquote forgotten guy because he missed most of the year with injury. But with center field right now being made up by Jose Siri and Tyrone Taylor, there's an opportunity for Drew Gilbert if he performs at the AAA level. So I want to see the young hitters that have a chance to establish themselves in the lineup, at some point throughout this season.
I'm with you as well, and I think an underrated thing, and we went through this last year, is an actual open competition in the bullpen. This is a bullpen that, there's top money to Diaz, Minter, You have some young guys that you want to see maybe replicate what they're building off of. I'd still like to see this team bring back Stanek because I think you always need that veteran guy, especially when you have postseason plans. But there's, like last year, Joe, just a volume of arms. Some of them don't even have major league deals. They can bounce between the minors and the major leagues where, hey, it's wide open. And a guy like David Stearns, you have to believe that's how he finds his hidden gems in the bullpen.
That's how David Stearns has always built bullpens, and that's how he's going to always build bullpens going forward. He certainly is going to want some stoppers at the end, but he's going to want to find guys on minor league deals. He's going to want to find guys off the waiver wire. And right now when you look at the bullpen, I really look at Diaz, as you said, as the closer. A.J. Minter, I think he's a top-quality setup man. And then Reed Garrett established himself last year as a true member of this bullpen. Dedniel Nunez, he had some injury stuff. And I think when you look back at the second half of 2024, it was not talked about enough, the impact that losing Dedniel Nunez had. And my understanding is down in Port St. Lucie, or he has been down in St. Lucie throwing, and he's healthy, should be good for spring training. From there, it's going to be, I think, a lot of competition.
All right, let's get the audience involved here. Do not be shy. Our producer, Jeff, he has the microphone for you. Please jump out of the chair, get on the show, ask a question. Jeff will be running around.
Going to the closest first makes sense.
It runs all the way up the stairs.
Yeah, all the way. All right.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, this is great.
So,
Thanks for coming.
Real quick question. With this Pete thing that's going on, do you think the looming presence of Clifford in the minors plays any role in how Stearns is trying to handle this?
It's a great name to bring up because Clifford, I think, Joe, because he's not at the top of the minor leagues, can also become a forgotten man because you never bet the house on a guy that hasn't even reached, AAA ball yet. I think Clifford is more of a 2 years down the road equation rather than a right now, but he could be one of the many names that factor in when you talk about not wanting to give a 4, 5, 6 year deal.
David Stearns has made it very clear at every turn that he gets to say, we're going to be involved with. We have access to every player in the player universe, but it's important that they routinely find spots for young players to get opportunity. And Ryan Clifford, as mentioned, there is a guy that you can look ahead to a couple years from now. I think he has the potential, if he can really put his whole offensive profile together, to be a 25, 30 home run, middle of the order guy that should get on base at a high clip. I think he could stand for some improvements on being maybe a little more aggressive early in counts when he's kind of, in a way, almost looking for a walk. And we saw that a lot at the AA level. But I don't know how much they're going to bank on a prospect. As you said, you really can't do that. But sure, it's a factor when you're talking about long-term investments.
All right, we'll take another question. I know we got Jeff running around with the mic. He's coming up right behind you. Don't be startled by him. He's a nice guy.
Hello. So with the reports yesterday with Max Scherzer potentially being somebody that's an option, which is kind of interesting, but I'm curious as to what your guys' personal opinions are, given how things ended up, but going forward.
I think this version of Max Scherzer, you would look at it kind of as bonus depth with this team. You're not asking him to come in and be a hero and be the number 1, 2, 3. I don't even know how you would honestly pencil him into the rotation right away, which is maybe why that signing doesn't happen. What would you think of Scherzer at this point? It feels like he's a guy, unless a team gets aggressive, it's going to take an injury to someone's starting 5, and then you give Max Scherzer a look.
Yeah, I think Scherzer's a guy at this point in his career, he's looking for a 1-year deal.
40 years old.
Yeah, 40 years old. And at this point, where the Mets are, I don't know if Scherzer makes a ton of sense for this roster. He's shown an inability to stay on the field. That goes without saying. And I don't know if that is the best use of funds. If the Mets want to bring a starting pitcher in, Max Scherzer, let's just use Justin Verlander's deal with the Giants as like an example of, you got $15 million, $16 million, something like that. If you're willing to invest something in that range on a starting pitcher, why don't you just go try to sign Jack Flaherty?
Right.
Or why don't you try to trade for Dylan Cease of the Padres? To me, Scherzer wouldn't move the needle much in the rotation, and frankly, I'd probably be more willing to run with what the Mets got than bring him in, knowing that there are guys like Brandon Sproat, like Blade Tidwell, that are at the AAA level that could push for jobs in the rotation at some point this year.
Why do you think after the starting market moved relatively quickly compared to the rest of the market, Flaherty's the guy that's still out there? Do you think, unlike Buehler, he wants a long-term deal?
I think he wanted a long-term deal, but I also think you dealt with the back. Like, the Yankees tried to acquire Flaherty at the trade deadline, but medically they flagged his back, and that took the deal off, and he ended up with the Dodgers. So I think there's some medical things you'd have to work through with Flaherty, and he was looking for a long-term deal. And as we've seen throughout this offseason, there are quite a few players out there that wanted and thought they were going to get long-term deals, and they're still looking for a job.
All right, keep those hands up for the questions. And, of course, you're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. You can subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, hey guys. So now with all the Pete stuff and he may not be coming back, do you think this could trigger like re-signing Iglesias for third base when you may move Vientos to first?
It's a really interesting question because it does open up, in theory, an infield spot, especially if you give the green light to Vientos. Hey, Pete's not coming back. You're going to be a first baseman. As you've said often, Joe, once you press that button, there's not really a lot going back. And I wonder if that's a situation where you get into spring, you see what the young guys have, assuming Iglesias is still out there. And this is someone that's had to wait for deals a long time before in the past. You go, we need a veteran out here. I don't think they love the idea of McNeil at third anymore. It feels like second base, corner, outfield. So that might be a wait and see, but it is a name that it's funny how little we bring up Jose Iglesias, considering how important he was to this team last year.
He was huge in 2024, and I think the Mets need a utility infielder of some kind. Whether Pete is back or not, I think they need that backup infielder, and I'm not a big fan of utilizing young players in that role. Like, I don't want Luis Angel Acuna to be sitting on the Mets bench and playing periodically. I want him either playing in AAA or playing at the major league level. So Iglesias or someone of that type of player, I think it would be really big for the Mets to bring someone like that, especially as you mentioned, with the young players potentially getting opportunities at third base. I think having a veteran would just help make things feel more solid.
And I think the longer this goes on, Iglesias is a guy that maybe just needs a major league deal rather than, the significant money we've seen to one-year guys the first couple months of the offseason. It might be a really low-cost ad. I think he's a guy that wants to be back.
Yeah, I think he wants to be here. And, hey, he's a up-and-coming Latin pop star. So
in a major market.
So go to the major market, and it'll help your music career, too.
Okay. My question, I just want my observation based on things you brought up. Opening day is very cold. So the pitcher you want is somebody who has a good feel for the ball, not maybe a finesse pitcher whose hands don't have a good grip on that day. So to me, that would be not be Senga. It would be somebody like a Minaya or a Peterson who isn't necessarily a finesse pitcher. I don't know what you think about that. The other thing is that Scherzer, years ago, people were waiting online here for a Syndergaard bobblehead. They were wrapped around. I never saw a line like it. And now Syndergaard's out of baseball, but apparently he's trying to get back in. If you were going to take a chance on somebody, at least to see how they're throwing, I would invite a Syndergaard before Scherzer. He's younger, and who knows if he can catch lightning in a bottle again. Probably not, but that would be interesting. Great redemption story. My question is, where do you think the Mets are going to fall within the division? Where do you think they can win the division, or they're a wild card? It's obviously a very tough division.
Well, I think it's an underrated topic of the offseason because the Mets, rightfully so, get all the hype after the way they played in the postseason, where the Phillies underachieved. The Braves, let's be fair, were significantly injured a lot of last year, but they underachieved to their expectations. But you're right. Quickly you forget how talented those teams, how good those teams are. I think Atlanta especially because they're riding on health returning. The Phillies didn't make a ton of big moves. They're riding on guys just getting right and performing better. So, but you went out and got Juan Soto. Like the Mets should be winning the NL East. I don't know why anybody should be talking themselves around hey, it's nice you snuck into a wild card and you surprised some people last year. But now you have a real core of this team, and you have young talent that's going to come up and help this team throughout the season as well. I think the bullpen comes into this season stronger. So my expectations are for the Mets to win the NL East.
That's what the expectations should be. At this point, it was great to get in as a wild card, and they had the magical run to the NLCS. But now the time is changing, and when you hand a player like Juan Soto the biggest contract in the history of North American sports, the expectations have to rise along with that. I think right now, if you evaluate the Mets, Phillies, and Braves, they have different strengths and different weaknesses. But I think largely they're similar. I think this is going to be an absolute battle in the NL East this year. As you mentioned, the Braves didn't do much. They signed Jerks and Profar the other day, which was a nice move. The Phillies got Jesus Luzardo. I don't know what else they've done. The Mets have been very active, as much as everyone says what they want to say about how active the Mets are. They made a lot of moves this winter, and there's no reason to think that the Mets cannot win the NL East.
I think the number one thing people overlook with the Mets the most is that we haven't seen the biggest jump from guys that we're expecting it from, like Francisco Alvarez. Mark Vientos was awesome last year, but what if he's even a little better this year? Those are the things you overlook with the Mets, where the Braves and the Phillies, their lineup, a lot of the household names at this point. So,
And Brandon Nimmo is a guy that had kind of a down year by his standards in 24. What if he just bounces back to being the player we know? Jeff McNeil, I know he is maybe not the most popular with some Mets fans, and every year, every deadline, every offseason, how many mailbag questions do we get about trading Jeff McNeil? But before he got injured, for like a month and a half span, he was one of the Mets' best hitters. So I still think there's something there with McNeil. He just needs to be more consistent and stay on the field. But this offense is shaping up to be a really, really good one. And I will say every chance I get, let's not understate the impact that Juan Soto makes.
all right, we have plenty of time for more questions. Keep them rolling in.
Hey guys, and I give him a lot of credit. Steve Cohen, no less than an hour ago, spoke very candidly about the negotiations with Pete Alonso, and he came out and he said he has not been overly thrilled with the offers that have come in from the Boras side. What do those offers you think look like from the Boras side that have been presented to Pete Alonso or presented to the Mets? And part two is, I saw somewhere floated out there yesterday on X or 2 days ago as Spencer Torkelson as a potential option for the Mets. What do you guys think of Spencer Torkelson? I think he, former number one pick.
Yeah.
Right-handed bat like Pete might be a good option. What are your guys' thoughts?
I'll start with the Pete rumors, and you could piggyback off, and then we'll go Torkelson. The toughest part is, that you're trying to negotiate in good faith, so all you get is rumors as a fan. And what we've gotten as fans is, it sounds like the last offer we know of was in the neighborhood of 3 years, $70 million, with opt-outs, which any contract Pete Alonso signs is going to have opt-outs, because Pete Alonso's not coming off a great year. To be honest, he's not coming off the
Two great years
with the Pete that we know, a superstar slugger. So that's number one. We know that's going to be part of the deal. But what we do know is it sounds like that camp's okay with it being 3 years with opt-outs, but the money's just not close. And I think, to be fair to the Mets, and a lot of people don't want to hear this because they just want Pete back in the lineup, including Joe and I, is that Pete needs to go get that deal somewhere else for the Mets to meet that number. And there's a reason we're approaching February, and Pete Alonso's not on a team, which is crazy for a guy with his numbers in the past, especially how coveted power is in this league. So I'm sure there's frustrations on both sides, but at some point you have to meet in the middle, and people don't want to hear it right now, but it feels like things are on the Mets side because other teams haven't stepped up to try to sign Pete in the way that, understandably, they probably thought they would.
The reality is we've spent the last 2 months trying to figure out an alternative spot for Pete Alonso to land. And we try to figure out fits just by looking at their roster and saying, oh, he could fit there. But there is no evidence out there that there's anybody coming at Pete Alonso with an aggressive contract. And I know some people have seen, as you said, the 3 years, around $70 million contract. And there's been a lot of talk that the Mets are, quote, lowballing Alonso. There's not anything to compete against, so how is it possible that they're lowballing him? So I do think it's, as you said, I do think this will end up a short-term contract somewhere. I still think there's a real chance that this marriage continues and they're just going through a bit of a rough patch, as they say.
If Pete Alonso is signing a short-term contract, is it to hit behind Juan Soto and a market that loves him and he's a marketable player, or is it to go play with the Angels? I mean, seriously, that's why they're being patient right now, in my opinion. And until we're wrong about that, we'll keep saying it on every show. But let's talk about Spencer Torkelson because former number one overall pick 2 years ago, monster year in the power department, not really everything else.
Yeah.
He's underachieved as a number one overall pick for the Tigers. That's a trade package. I don't know how you figure it out because it feels like if you're Detroit, you're selling really low.
It's interesting because when the Tigers signed Gleyber Torres, who was second baseman for the Yankees, they announced that they're moving Colt Keith to first base. And that's where Spencer Torkelson played. So it feels like an odd fit as far as how they feel about Torkelson long term. Feels like a vintage, like Stearns in Milwaukee would have traded for Spencer Torkelson. So if Pete Alonso is to go somewhere else and the Tigers are interested in trading for Spencer Torkelson, hard name to say.
Yeah,
hard
I don't
name
know if
to
we
say.
want this one to happen,
Yeah.
if it's going to be this
Yeah.
brutal for us.
A little tough, but if he's available, I think that's something the Mets should absolutely look at.
All right, let's keep them rolling.
Hey, along those lines, so do you think it's possible that Alonso might not be a guy that Stearns wants to keep, right, for whatever reason, and also eyeing a guy like Guerrero for next year or at the trade deadline, something like that, where he just feels like go with the young guys now that we have, maybe give Beatty a chance, and it's just he's not his kind of player given his age and that kind of thing.
I think that's the harsh reality of it right now, right? Because you would think this would be done by now if they were projecting 5 great years ahead for Pete Alonso. And the reality is right now, nobody is, because he would have signed a 5-year deal, and once upon a time, Pete had a 5+ year deal on the table. So I think it's a really fair point. I think you can like a player and want a player, but your projections might be different than what he's hoping for. And I think the Mets are in a 2-year world with Pete Alonso, the harsh reality, and maybe you're comfortable going to 3 because it's Pete, and there's a history there and a comfort there and a need there. But I think that's the tough part, Joe, is that the things we heard with Stearns before he got this job was always defense and power, and Pete has one of those things right now. But the Mets are living in a world where you can't have a ton of guys on long-term deals, and all of them are going to be a DH in 4 years. Like that's the Guerrero conversation as well that not a lot of people are having yet because he's 26. But if you're signing Vlad to a 10-year deal, whoever's doing that, the guy's 245 pounds and standing on a corner with the glove, but at 32, is he going to be doing that? So these are the harder conversations for executives where, as fans, you just want the now, understandably.
Yeah, you want right now. I think David Stearns wants Pete Alonso back. He wants Pete Alonso back on his terms. And that is something that I think we have to get used to a bit of as Mets fans. Just because Steve Cohen has all this money, you don't want to be the spot that is just overpaying and overpaying and overpaying. Stearns is here to bring more pragmatic thinking to the player acquisition process. So I do think he wants Alonso, but he wants him just purely on his terms. He's not desperate to have him, and that's obviously a big factor. And Soto is someone that they badly wanted, and that's why they went to the levels they did. Alonso is like, it would be good to have.
All right, as we get ready for another question or two, the signing sheet is going around for the Cadillac Club tickets. If you were here for the show, please sign up to win that raffle. It's an opportunity you won't want to miss. And, of course, the Mets pod will get back to you via email to see who wins. All right, our next question.
So last season, Vientos started in the minors, had a very big impact on the season as a whole. Acuna closed out the season, obviously as a pretty big impactful player as well. So just curious as your thoughts as a player that will start this season in the minors, as who's this year's contributor on an impact level?
A 10 out of 10 Mets pod question.
Yeah,
just
perfect.
Built for the Mets pod. Yeah. I like that you brought up Drew Gilbert earlier.
Yeah.
Because I think when that question's asked, you really try to nail down 2 things. 1, who's the closest to being ready? And 2, where's the opportunity? Yeah. And when you look at the Mets right now, if he didn't get hurt last year, the answer was Drew Gilbert's one of the closest to being ready. And 2, we like Tyrone Taylor, and Jose Siri is a very role-defined player, plus defense and power, but not a lot in between. There's opportunity in center field. Maybe not now, but maybe in June or July.
I firmly believe last year the Mets signed Harrison Bader with the idea that Drew Gilbert would take over at some point during the year. I think a lot of people, when the Mets signed Bader, said they signed a 4th outfielder type of guy. And I think he proved that to kind of be mostly the case by the end of the season. So I think that can repeat itself with Drew Gilbert. But to not just agree and say Drew Gilbert, I think Brandon Sproat has an opportunity here to really make an impact on the back end of a rotation where right now you're looking at Paul Blackburn and Griffin Canning, but if Brandon Sproat performs at the AAA level like he's capable of, I think he's a guy that could come up and make just a massive impact in the starting rotation and really round it into form.
All right, one last question here for the Mets pod. Thank you so much to everybody that stuck around for the show today.
Okay, first time, long time, guys. Thanks so much for being here. I love the show. Last year, 2024 is probably one of the most fun years that we've had in a long time. A lot of gimmicks. Right now, we don't have Iglesias and OMG. Looks like we might not be getting the playoff pumpkin with Pete. I hear rumors that Grimace is signing in Toronto. What do you guys think about bringing on the Hamburglar? And to piggyback on that, do you think that our relationship with Pete is okay, that he's going to shop back any offers? Or do you think that, the playoff pumpkin is rotten and it's to the Hamburglar?
Number one, Grimace is Mets territory all the
Yeah.
way. I implored the Jets to try the Hamburglar. Nobody listened. Maybe it would have went a long ways for us. But I think business is tough, and that's why a lot of these guys have agents, because they don't want to be personally involved in it. And I would hope that that's not a situation with Pete, that there's hard feelings. There's hard feelings in all negotiations, but you'd hope that can be put aside to get something done that's the best opportunity for both sides.
I'm largely gimmicked out. I think we had enough gimmicks in 2024 to kind of
Don't forget the Rizzler. He was the last answer for the last win of the season.
Yeah, the Rizzler, of course. Who could possibly forget the impact the Rizzler had? But when you look at, I know a lot of this has been Alonso, understandably so, but that's the business side of things, Connor, as you said, and they just have to figure out if it makes sense for both parties. And if he takes something personally, I would understand. Negotiations can be personal.
All right, this is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. Make sure you sign the sheet going around to win 2 tickets to the Cadillac Club. That is going to be an awesome experience for someone who comes to the Parking Pass. Don't worry. And please subscribe to our show, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch every episode on SNY's YouTube channel. We will see most of you down at spring training in Port St. Lucie.
Thank you.